Let me tell you about 3 mornings at 3 different auctions, in 3 different states, across 3 different decades. And let me tell you why. In each one, a roomful of grown men laughed at exactly the wrong person. You've seen it before, maybe. Maybe you've even been one of the ones laughing. A rural auction has a way of bringing out the worst in a certain kind of man. The kind who measures everybody else by what they drove in on, what they're wearing, how they hold their shoulders. That kind of man is always certain. And in every one of these 3 stories, that kind of man was about to find out he was wrong. So settle in. We've got some ground to cover. Picture this with me. It's a Saturday morning in late August of 1992, out near Bozeman, Montana, where the Yakima Valley flattens out under the Bridger Mountains. The air is sharp with that thin Montana cold that comes even in summer at 4,000 feet. There's a livestock auction at a working ranch about 10 miles east of town. Registered Black Angus going under the hammer, a herd dispersal because the old ranchman had finally retired. The dirt road into the ranch is lined with trucks. Big trucks, new trucks, crew cab Fords and 3/4-ton Chevys, polished up like they were going to a wedding. Cattlemen had come in from 3 states, buyers from feedlots, brand inspectors, a couple of veterinarians from the University Extension Office, and one man named Garrett Wolf. Now, Garrett Wolf ran the biggest commercial cow-calf operation in 3 counties, 6,200 head of cattle on leased ground, stretching from the Yellowstone almost to the Crazies. He was 48 years old, 6'2", wore a $1,000 Stetson, drove a black dually with his brand cut into the door. He had a way of walking into a room that made other men quiet down. He had come to that auction to buy the top 3 bulls, and everybody knew it. And then, around 8 in the morning, while men were standing around with paper cups of coffee and the sun was just clearing the mountains, a man rode up the dirt road on a bicycle. Not a fancy bicycle. A 1970s Schwinn cruiser, the kind a paperboy would have had, painted that faded blue you only see on bicycles that have lived outside for 20 years. The chain was singing. The tires were a little soft. There was a canvas vet bag bungee corded to the rear rack and a battered leather satchel slung across the rider's back. The man on that bicycle was named Elias Brandt. He was 34 years old. He was a veterinarian, the kind that worked out of the back of a pickup, traveling small ranches in Gallatin County, pulling calves and treating mastitis and floating horse teeth. That morning, his 1982 Ford had thrown a water pump in his driveway. He had 2 choices: skip the auction or ride the 35 miles in. He'd left his place at 4 in the morning. He had a registered bull in his eye, and he wasn't going to miss it for a water pump. Elias rolled his Schwinn up to the rail by the cattle pens, leaned it against the fence, took off his cap, wiped his face with a bandana, and started walking the bulls the way a man does when he's reading them. Garrett Wolf saw him. Garrett Wolf saw the bicycle. He grinned the grin of a man who'd just been handed his morning's entertainment, and he called out across the gravel lot, loud enough for 40 men to hear. Boys, come look at this. We got us a bidder on a Schwinn. Hey, Doc, you riding home with a bull tied to the handlebars? The men around him laughed. One of them said, maybe he's bidding on a calf. Calf'll fit in that bag. More laughter. Garrett wasn't done. Doc, I've seen better bicycles in a Goodwill. You sure you wandered into the right sale? Elias Brandt stopped walking. He turned. He looked at Garrett Wolf, calm as still water, and he said, Truck broke down, Mr. Wolf. The bull doesn't care how I got here. Then he turned back around and kept reading the cattle. Now, here's the thing nobody in that lot knew. Elias had been the on-call vet for the seller, the retiring rancher, for 11 years. He had treated every animal on that ground. He knew their lines. He knew their dispositions. He knew which one of those bulls had a small congenital problem that any other vet would have caught and most buyers would have walked from. And he knew something else nobody else in that lot knew. That bull's grandsire had thrown 3 of the highest-rated calves in the Northwest 2 years running, and the genetics were sitting right there in plain sight, masked by a defect Elias could fix in 2 months with a minor procedure and rest. The auction started at 10. Garrett Wolf bought the first 2 bulls right out of the gate. Big numbers, big swagger, men slapping his back. The 3rd bull came up, the one with the hidden problem. And the bidding stalled at $3,000 because every buyer in the tent could see something was off in his gait. Garrett wouldn't touch him. The auctioneer was about to no-sale the lot. And then a hand went up from the back of the tent. Elias Brandt, $3,200. Sold. The crowd laughed again, softer this time, because they figured the bicycle vet had just bought himself a lemon. Elias paid in cash, drawn from a leather billfold that had been in his back pocket for 11 years. He arranged with the seller, a man he'd known a long time, to keep the bull on the property for 60 days while he got transport sorted. He shook hands with the old ranchman, who looked at him and said quietly, "You saw it, didn't you, Eli?" And Elias just nodded. Then he walked back to his Schwinn, swung a leg over, and rode 35 miles home with the chain still singing. 6 years later, the calves coming off that bull were winning the regional Angus shows. Ranchers from Idaho, Wyoming, and the Dakotas were paying stud fees to breed to him. Elias never put the bull in a sale ring again. He kept him on a small leased pasture, and he charged his neighbors a flat $100 for breeding services, about a fifth of what the market would have borne. Because Elias had grown up watching small ranchers go under, and he had decided a long time ago that he wasn't going to be the man who squeezed them. Garrett Wolf went bankrupt in 2004. Beef prices had turned, and his leveraged operation couldn't carry the debt. He lost the dually, the Stetson collection, and most of his leased ground. The small ranchers Elias Brandt had been treating cheap and breeding cheap for years, about 30 of them. They made it through, quietly, the way small ranchers usually do when somebody helps them and doesn't ask for credit. A reporter from the Bozeman paper interviewed Elias in 2010 about his work in the valley. She asked him about the bull, the auction, the bicycle. He shrugged and said this: "A man rides a bicycle to an auction. The rest of the room thinks he's poor. They're solving for the wrong thing. The bicycle wasn't the answer. The bicycle was the question." He still has the Schwinn. It hangs from a hook in his barn. The chain still sings. Educational note: the American beef industry experienced a profound consolidation crisis in the 1990s and early 2000s, when over-leveraged commercial operations collapsed under shifting cattle prices and rising feed costs. Many independent ranchers survived only because rural veterinarians, equipment-sharing networks, and informal credit arrangements between neighbors held the rural economy together. Specialty Angus genetics, properly managed, often produced more long-term value than scale operations could match, a fact the consolidation lobby preferred to ignore. Now let me take you forward 15 years, to a different state and a different kind of auction. October of 2007, Yakima Valley, Washington. The hop harvest is just finished. The air smells like cut vines and wet earth, and the cottonwoods along the Yakima River are turning that pale yellow they turned before the first hard frost. A hop farm is going under. 3 generations of the same family had grown hops on that ground. First for the breweries in Spokane in the 1940s, then for the regional cooperatives. Then, in the last 20 years, for the craft beer boom that was supposed to save them and didn't. The patriarch had died in February. The bank was taking the equipment. The auction was set for a Saturday morning. About 60 buyers showed up. Most of them were professional ag investors out of Seattle and Portland, men in pressed Carhartts that had never seen field work, leaning on rental SUVs, scrolling spreadsheets on their phones. They were there to scoop up the equipment cheap, parcel it, and resell it through equipment brokers in Idaho and California. They had done it half a dozen times that fall, in half a dozen valleys. Walking the rows of equipment that morning was a man named Marcus Holliday. Marcus was 42 years old. He had been a high school history teacher in Toppenish for 15 years before his father died, and left him 20 acres of orchard ground a mile outside town. Marcus had quit teaching that summer to try, in his own words, to figure out if I'm a farmer, or just a man who inherited a farm. He had a quiet way about him, glasses, a soft voice, and a pair of work boots that still looked too new. He wasn't there for the modern equipment. He was there for one specific lot, Lot 47, listed in the catalog as Alice Chalmers WD 1948, condition fair, sold as is, no reserve. The Alice Chalmers sat in the back of the equipment row. Orange paint had faded to a kind of dirty pink. The rear tires were cracked. There was a steel toolbox welded to the left fender, lid rusted shut. The seat had been replaced with a piece of plywood. It looked, frankly, like junk. The Seattle investors had walked past it without slowing down. Marcus had grown up hearing his grandfather talk about a tractor exactly like that one. He didn't have a plan. He just wanted it. The auction started. The investors went hard at the modern equipment. The John Deere balers, the Kubota loaders, the irrigation systems. They were buying in pairs, splitting lots, talking on cell phones the whole time. By the time the auctioneer got to Lot 47, the investors were laughing among themselves, half bored, watching the day wind down. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Lot 47, the Alice. Open at 300. Silence. 200. A man in a fleece vest, one of the Seattle group, called out, $50, scrap value. His friends laughed. Marcus raised his hand. 300. The fleece vest man turned around in his folding chair. Buddy, you know that thing's a paperweight, right? The investors laughed harder. One of them said, let him have it. He's the local color. Another one said, loud, hey, school teacher, you gonna plant petunias with it? Marcus didn't answer. He just kept his hand up. 300 going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman in the back. Marcus paid $300.42, including the buyer's premium. He arranged for a friend with a flatbed to haul the tractor home that afternoon. The investors were already gone by the time the Alice was loaded, off to the next valley, the next sale. That evening in his barn, Marcus took a flat blade screwdriver and a can of penetrating oil to the rusted shut toolbox on the fender. It took him 40 minutes. When the lid finally came up, he sat down on an overturned bucket and stared at what was inside. A leather pouch, oiled and folded. Inside the pouch, a stack of letters tied with brown twine. Photographs in a small tin box. A military discharge paper from the United States Army, dated November of 1945. A faded ticket stub from the steamship General M.C. Meigs, sailing from Yokohama to Seattle in March of 1946. And a small black and white photograph of a young American GY standing next to a Japanese woman in a doorway, both of them looking straight at the camera, neither of them smiling, both of them holding something complicated in their faces. The letters told the rest. The original owner of that tractor had been a soldier named Corporal Henry Wakahara, an American-born Japanese soldier from Yakima who had fought in Italy with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, while his own family was interned at Heart Mountain in Wyoming. After the war, the Army sent him to occupied Japan as a translator, where he had met and married a young Japanese widow with a small son. He had brought them both home to Yakima in '46, started a hop operation, and farmed quietly for 43 years. The family had never spoken of any of it. The toolbox had been welded shut sometime in the 1950s. Marcus sat in his barn that night and read every letter twice. There was something else. Under a layer of tractor paint on the steering column, when Marcus chipped at it with a thumbnail the next morning, he found an original factory data plate from the rare 1948 Alice Chalmers WD prototype run. Fewer than 40 units ever produced. A collector in Spokane offered him $11,000 sight unseen. Marcus didn't sell. He drove out to the Wakahara family the next weekend. The corporal's grandchildren, 3 of them, all in their 30s, all working professionals in the Tri-Cities, had not known any of it. Their grandfather had died in 1991 without ever showing them the letters or the photographs. Marcus laid the leather pouch on their kitchen table and walked them through every page. They cried. They asked him what he wanted. He said, nothing. They're yours. They were always yours. The tractor he kept. He restored it himself over 4 years, learning as he went, with help from a retired diesel mechanic in Wapato. He never put it back to work. He parked it under a small open shed at the edge of his orchard, with a hand-lettered sign nailed to a post that read, Corporal Henry Wakahara, Yakima Valley, 1946 to 1991. He came home. Marcus still teaches now, part-time at the community college. American history. The Japanese-American internment is one of his units. He brings a photograph of the tractor every semester. He told a reporter once, the men in the fleece vests bought 100 lots that day. They thought they were buying value. They were buying tractors. I was buying a man's life. Educational note. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States government forcibly relocated approximately 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry, 2/3 of them American citizens, to incarceration camps. Heart Mountain in Wyoming held over 10,000. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed largely of Japanese-American volunteers, became the most decorated unit of its size in U.S. military history. After the war, many returned home to find their farms and businesses gone. Their stories were rarely told, often by their own choice, and many did not surface until the 1980s redress movement. Now I want to tell you the third story, and I want to warn you up front. This one's going to stay with you. It's a Wednesday morning in May of 2015 in Cody, Wyoming, at the foot of the Absaroka Range, where the grass is just turning green after a long winter, and the wind off the mountains still carries cold. There's a foreclosure auction at the Park County Courthouse. 90 acres of small ranch ground out by the South Fork. House, barn, a quarter-mile of creek frontage, 2 stand-up corrals, and a pole shed. The seller, well, the seller had been a man named Daniel Coulter. He had died in November of the previous year. Heart attack. 51 years old, in his own kitchen, on a Tuesday afternoon. Alone. He had left behind a daughter named Hattie Mae, 11 years old. Her mother had died when she was 4. Daniel had been carrying a balloon mortgage on the ranch. The note came due in March. There was no one to pay it. The bank scheduled the auction for May. About 20 bidders showed up that morning. Most of them were locals, neighbors who knew the place, a couple of ranchers from down the valley looking to add ground. But the man everyone was watching was a developer out of Denver named Vance Marlowe. Vance had been buying up small ranches in the Cody area for 4 years, converting them into private hunting lodges for wealthy clients out of Texas and California. He drove a black Range Rover. He wore a tailored barn coat that had never seen a barn. He was 46 years old, smooth, polite, and absolutely certain he was going home with the Coulter Ranch. The auction was held on the courthouse steps. About 9 in the morning, the bidders gathered. The sheriff was there to read the notice. The county attorney was there with the paperwork. And then a small girl walked up the courthouse steps. She was wearing a pale blue church dress that was a little too long for her. Marcus's mother had hemmed it the night before, and a pair of brown leather Mary Janes, and she was carrying a manila envelope. Her hair was pulled back in a single braid. She walked up to the auctioneer, a county officer named Thomas Briggs, and she said, in a clear, quiet voice, "Sir, I'd like to register to bid." Thomas Briggs looked down at her. He was 60 years old. He'd known her father. He said very gently, "Honey, you have to be 18 to register. Is your guardian here?" Hattie Mae opened the manila envelope. She handed him a notarized letter from her court-appointed conservator, a woman named Sarah Dunn out of Billings, authorizing Hattie Mae to bid on her own behalf at this specific auction, with funds released from a trust, accompanied by the original certified check for the proof of funds. She had a copy of her father's will. She had a copy of a trust document established by her late maternal grandmother, a woman named Margaret Holloway, who had died in 2009, a trust Hattie Mae had only learned about 3 weeks earlier. The trust held a number. I'm not going to tell you the number. The number doesn't matter. What matters is that it was enough. It was more than enough. Thomas Briggs read the documents carefully. He took his time. Then he looked up at Hattie Mae and he said, "All right, sweetheart, you're registered." Vance Marlowe, standing at the bottom of the steps in his tailored barn coat, started laughing. Not cruelly, not at first. The kind of laugh a grown man does when he sees a thing he thinks is cute. He turned to the man beside him, a real estate agent he'd flown in for the day, and said, loud enough for the steps to hear, "Well, isn't that something? The little princess wants to play rancher." A few people in the crowd chuckled. Hattie Mae did not look at him. The auctioneer began. Opening bid, $340,000. Vance Marlowe raised his card. $350, $375. Hattie Mae raised her hand. $400,000. The crowd went quiet. Vance laughed again, but the laugh was different now. He bid $425. Hattie Mae said, in the same clear voice, $450. Vance looked at his real estate agent. The real estate agent looked at his clipboard. Vance bid $475. Hattie Mae said, $500. And here's where the morning turned, because the neighbors who had come down to watch, the ones who had known Daniel Coulter, who had pulled calves with him in the spring and helped him fix his tractor, the ones who had laughed gently at the little girl in the blue dress when she walked up the steps, those neighbors started doing something unexpected. A man named Wesley Park, who ran a small horse operation 2 miles upstream, raised his hand and bid $525. Then he turned to Hattie Mae and gave her a small nod. He had no intention of buying the ranch. He was running interference. Hattie Mae bid $550. Another neighbor, an older woman named Junie Cabot, who had been Daniel's neighbor for 26 years, bid $575. Same nod. Vance Marlowe was getting agitated. He bid $600. Hattie Mae bid $625. Wesley bid $650. Junie bid $675. Hattie Mae bid $700. Vance was sweating now. He had a budget. The budget was about to break. He bid $725 with a strain in his voice. Hattie Mae said, $750. Vance Marlowe stood there for a long, long moment. Then he set his bitter card down on the courthouse rail and shook his head. Thomas Briggs banged the gavel. Sold to the young lady in the blue dress. The neighbors clapped. Some of them cried. Wesley Park walked over and shook Hattie Mae's hand the way a man shakes another man's hand at a funeral. Both hands, long. Junie Cabot hugged her. Vance Marlowe walked down the courthouse steps to his Range Rover and drove out of Cody and never came back. Now, here is what happened after. Hattie Mae could not run a ranch at 11 years old. Everybody knew that, including her. She did not pretend otherwise. With the help of her conservator and of Wesley Park, she leased the operating rights to a woman named Caroline Mendez, who was the widow of one of Daniel's closest friends. Caroline had been ranching on her own for 2 years and needed ground. The lease was structured generously, and a portion of every year's net was directed into a small fund. Hattie Mae and Caroline named it the Daniel Coulter Fund, for the children of ranchers in Park County who lost a parent. Hattie Mae moved in with her aunt and uncle in town, finished middle school, finished high school, and graduated valedictorian in 2021. She is 19 years old now, a sophomore at Montana State University in Bozeman, in their pre-veterinary program. She comes home to the ranch every weekend she can. Caroline still runs it. The Daniel Coulter Fund has helped 14 ranch children in Park County since 2015. A reporter from the Cody Enterprise interviewed Hattie Mae the spring she turned 18. The reporter asked her what she remembered about that morning on the courthouse steps. Hattie Mae thought for a moment and she said, "I remember the man laughing. I remember Mr. Park's nod. And I remember thinking, this is the only chance I'll ever have to keep my dad's ground. I wasn't going to lose it because somebody thought I was small." The reporter asked her if she had any message for the man in the Range Rover. Hattie Mae shook her head. No, he wasn't part of what mattered. The neighbors were. That ranch is still 90 acres of small ground on the South Fork. The house is the same. The pole shed is the same. The creek still runs cold off the Absarokas. And every Memorial Day, Hattie Mae and Caroline and Wesley and Junie and a few of the neighbors put flowers on Daniel Coulter's grave at the Riverside Cemetery in Cody. And every now and then, somebody passing through Park County asks about the small ranch owner, who's some kind of college kid up in Bozeman. And the locals just smile a little and tell them the story of the morning a girl in a blue dress walked up the courthouse steps with an envelope. Educational note. Rural land in the American West has been the target of consolidation pressure for over 4 decades, with private equity-backed buyers acquiring small ranches for conversion into recreational properties. This trend has accelerated since 2010, particularly around national parks and in scenic counties of Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado. Local communities have responded with land trusts, conservation easements, and informal neighbor-to-neighbor cooperation at foreclosure auctions. Quiet practices that rarely make headlines but that have preserved the working ranch character of many western valleys. A trust fund established for a minor child can also become a vehicle for protecting family land. So 3 stories, 3 mornings, 3 different states, a bicycle, a rusted tractor, a girl in a blue dress. In every one of them, somebody walked into an auction and looked at somebody else and decided in less than 5 seconds who that person was. And in every one of them, they were wrong. Not because the laughter was particularly cruel. Sometimes it wasn't even cruel, just casual. But because they were measuring with the wrong ruler. A bicycle isn't poverty. It's a man whose truck broke down and who came anyway. A rusted tractor isn't junk. It's the silent record of a life that nobody bothered to read. A small girl in a blue dress isn't a child to be patronized. She's somebody's daughter, and she's holding an envelope. The auctioneers in these stories, Lyle, the man in Yakima, Thomas Briggs in Cody, they all did the same thing. They listened. They read the paperwork. They took the bids the way bids ought to be taken, from anybody whose money is good, no matter what they wrote in on. And the men who laughed, Garrett, the Seattle investors, Vance Marlowe, they all did the same thing too. They paid for the laugh eventually, not because anybody set out to punish them, just because the world has a way of settling its accounts in time. If there's a thing worth taking out of these 3 stories, it's not a slogan. It's something quieter. The next time you walk into a room and you find yourself sizing somebody up by their boots, by their bicycle, by their dress, by the year on the dashboard of the truck they drove in on, pause for 1 beat, just 1, and ask yourself what you might be missing. Because the answer, more often than not, is everything that matters.